Welcome back, everybody. I just want to add this little preamble to this video. I know the video hasn't started for you yet, but I just finished shooting it. Just a warning, this is going to be a long video and there's going to be a lot of in-depth bits that may be confusing. But in short, it's going to be all about modifiers on the Axe-FX 3. I'm going to do some really simple examples, and then I'm going to focus on examples that I actually use. So hopefully these examples will illustrate how certain controllers and modifiers work in the Fractal products and how you can put them to good use. Firmware 14 has added the ability to basically combine modifiers, and I didn't get to touch on that at all. I was hoping I was going to do it, but I didn't. It's a pretty amazing feature, and it's something that I think deserves a standalone video. But having said that, let's get into the video. Enjoy. We're going to get started by talking about, I would probably guess, the most commonly used modifier or controller, and that's an external expression pedal. I have an expression pedal plugged into my FC6 in the pedal jack number 1, and a really common thing to set up is a wah, controlled by this external pedal. So before we do that, I have this preset based around a few different Fender amps. I'm currently on the Vibrolux model with a bit of compression on the neck pickup of my Strat. Sounds like this. Beautiful stuff. Let's do this. Let's take a wah block, and at basically the stock settings for this Clyde wah, if you disengage the block, it's like having a wah that's unable to move. I mean, you can move this controller with your mouse or, with a knob on there, but it's not normally the way we would think about a wah. We would think about a wah connected to a pedal that we can sweep. So we need to set that up. At the moment, we just get this. So it would be cool to be able to move that with a pedal. I've got a pedal connected to the FC6, like I said before, so I can do this. Right-click the control parameter in the wah. I'm going to set source number 1 as FC1 pedal number 1, and I'm also going to do something else. I'm going to set up Autoengage down here. I'm going to set Autoengage to be a medium speed. This is handy because if I don't have a pedal connected for whatever reason, the wah won't accidentally automatically engage. This way, it's only going to engage when I've got a pedal in and when I kind of give it a nice little sweep. For me, I like the toe down of the pedal to be the off position, so I'm going to set the off value all the way up. We don't have to do anything else. And now I can wiggle my expression pedal and it's going to let the wah do its thing. When I push the pedal all the way forward, or if you're using the heel down auto engage off, the wah block's going to turn off. No switch needed. That's awesome, and that's kind of like level 1 of getting to know controllers. Let's say we don't have a pedal and we wanted this wah to basically just kind of turn on and go up and down the way you might if you were just kind of using a wah for the first time. A different type of controller we could use, let's right click this and let's set the source to be an LFO. LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. And if we want to take a look at our LFOs in depth, we can go to the controller section in Axe Edit, go to LFO 1 and 2. So essentially what an LFO is going to do is it's just going to sweep up and down, but according to a particular shape, which we would set with the type. We can set it to be running, which I'm guessing most of the time you're going to want to use. You can set it to stop as well. And then we can set the rate, the depth, the duty cycle, which we don't need to talk about in this video, and a few other controls that aren't super important for now. I just want you to get a kind of handle on what an LFO does. So at the moment, I have it connected to my wah. If I turn my wah on, I'm going to turn auto engage off for this so that it doesn't continuously switch on and off. We're just going to have this wah block on, and you're just going to hear the wah sweep up and down, and I can change the rate with this right here. this random LFO type is actually pretty interesting because we can use this. Let's set its rate, say, to 2 Hertz. We'll leave everything else where it is, but I'll go back to my wah block. And what I'm going to do is go back to that modifiers menu. I'm going to change the attack and the release. These are essentially going to smooth the rate that that LFO value changes the actual wah block. So if I set these to about 30 milliseconds, that's normally enough smoothing to kind of get a really nice random sounding wah. And this, a lot of the time, is kind of indecipherable from actually just kind of mucking around on a wah pedal. I wasn't using a foot controller or anything like that. That was all the Axe effects doing that. You can take this to a lot of different levels, but and LFOs can be assigned to just about anything you want to wobble or modulate. For example, you can use this to create a tremolo effect in a drive block rather than an amp block, or you can use it to pan things according to certain shapes. There's so much scope for fun things you can do with LFOs, but that's probably my favorite thing to do is the random wah, so that rather than actually have to use a wah, I can just step on a button and walk around the stage and make it sound like I'm playing a really convincing auto wah. All right, we've looked at LFOs and we've looked at, I guess, just using a standard expression pedal. Let's talk about the envelope controller next. What the envelope controller is going to do is it's going to essentially kind of measure how hard we're playing the guitar, how much signal we're sending out of our guitar, which normally as guitar players we control with our hands and our picking dynamics and articulation, as well as things like the volume and tone controls. And what I want to do with this is I want to create an envelope filter. This is a classic effect from the 70s that you've probably heard countless times, may be mistaken for being a wah. I'm going to bring up a different preset and show you how I would set that up. So there's going to be two things here. We need a filter block to get the filter part, and then we need to tweak our envelope controller. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to a filter block here in this preset. And what I've done is I have set the filter to be a low pass filter. And then I've right clicked on the low pass frequency and assigned this value to the envelope follower. We haven't tweaked the envelope follower just yet, but I've set the minimum frequency to be 186 Hertz for whatever reason. I've set the max as high as it will go. Nothing else really going on there. But what I have done with this filter is I have increased the Q control. And what that does is kind of gives it, I think of it like a knee in there, right? So this is going to give us our classic envelope filter sound. If you don't have that in there, the effect is going to be way too subtle. You might see this control labeled resonance or something like that on a classic filter pedal. So we've got that going on. And then what we have to do is in our controller section, if we go to the envelope controller, we need to set the source of the envelope. I'm plugged into input 1 of my Axe effects, so I've set the source to input 1. Then probably the most important control here is the threshold control. I would just encourage you to play around with this until you kind of get the response that you want. And on top of the threshold control, we've got the attack and release controls here that are essentially, I always think of this on like an old synthesizer. You would go for something like a long attack to get that big sweep up, if that's an effect you're going for. If you want a short attack to get a really immediate response. We'll hear both in a second, but the important thing, like I said, is really getting the threshold right. And this is essentially like the sensitivity control in here. If you've got a guitar with low output pickups, you're going to have to change this to a different value to 1 if you've got really high output pickups. So let's just dial in the threshold. I'm going to engage this filter block, and then we'll play around with that threshold just to hear what the effect does. So you can hear if I had the threshold too low, it was like the effect was always at its maximum. If I had it too high, then it wasn't even triggering properly. Let's play around with the attack now. I'll go for a really short attack and then a really long attack so you can hear the difference. I like about 100 for the attack and 100 for the release with this particular setting. We've also got a low cut, a high cut, and a gain control. The gain control I've just increased a little bit for this particular patch because this guitar has pretty mellow pickups. Then we can actually see what's happening in the filter block now. So that is a really basic attempt at creating an envelope filter. But in this patch, I love the old Electro Harmonix POG, and I wanted to use that kind of as the inspiration for this patch. So we've got the envelope filter, but it is now after a quad chromatic pitch shifter, which is giving us an octave down and a fifth up. You can see there's a little bit of detune on each voice as well, which is going to make it sound kind of chorusy, and we get this effect. We could take that to another level and add a synth block in here. This is what we get when we have a synth in parallel to our main signal with that processing. And then the final step would be to run all of that into a fuzz face before the amp. This is wild. Absolutely disgusting. So much character in there. I love that. Let's take a look at an ADSR next, because I kind of think of an ADSR like a preset envelope control. Here what we're doing is we're using our playing articulation and dynamics to create that envelope curve in real time, but we can kind of preset that using an ADSR. An ADSR is a controller that just confused me for a long time, even though it was like attack, decay, sustain, release. Great, I know what it does. I know what it does on a synthesizer, but using it and implementing it on the guitar was just something I just kind of never got until I played around with this patch. So I'm going to bring this one up. So for this patch, I'm doing something with the parametric EQ block. You can see I have this parametric EQ curve with a bunch of modifiers on different frequencies, but what you see is that every modifier is attached to the ADSR, including things like the Q or the resonance there, this middle frequency that's being boosted. I think it might be being boosted and then cut depending on where the ADSR is in its curve, and then this one. So essentially what it's going to do is create this big weird sweep. And I've put it after a reverb, so it's going to give us a filtered reverb. But let's have a look at what this controller is doing. We have a really nice little diagram here of our ADSR. And the mode that I'm using for this is that it's going to look at input 1, and input 1, kind of like the envelope controller, once it crosses a certain threshold, it's going to trigger this predetermined curve, and that curve is then mapped onto the parametric EQ. I know this is kind of complicated, but have a listen to this. It's pretty awesome. Super cool, right? This is probably one of the most confusing and complicated examples of an ADSR, but this is the actual patch that I use the ADSR in the most right there. And that's what it does. What we're going to move over to next is maybe my favorite modifier in the Axe-Fx 3, the pitch follower. But for that, I need a different guitar. I've done a few standalone videos on the pitch follower before, but I really want to show it off in the context of this video, because all the pitch follower is going to do is it is going to take the pitch of the notes. All right, so the way the pitch follower works is it is going to convert the frequency of the strings that it measures and it's going to turn that into a control signal that we can map onto a parameter. So in this particular patch, I've got it mapped to parameters. I have it mapped to the input trim. So my pitch follower is going to take the input trim from 1 when I'm playing my lowest note, all the way up to 4 when I'm playing up here. So I'm going to have more gain as I play higher, which is something that in general I like. I've also just tweaked this modifier curve a little bit. I've given it some smoothing by setting the attack and release to 30 milliseconds, and I've set the mid value to about 30% because I only really want this to kick in once I get up quite high. Then I'm doing a very similar thing with the multi-tap delay input gain. This multi-tap is connected in parallel. So by connecting this to the input gain, that's just going to control the overall level. Basically the same controls going on there. I think the release might be a little bit longer, but I'm just going to start down low and play a riff, and you're gradually going to hear more gain and more delay on there. It's magic. So good. I absolutely love that trick right there. I'm also using another trick in this particular patch that on scene 1 here, I have my main just kind of rhythm guitar sound with no delay in there. But when I switch over to my lead sound, I'm actually adding an input boost, and I'm engaging the fat switch in the amp block as well, which kind of just does what it says, you know, makes the amp sound a little bit fatter by changing the mid-range control frequency. So you can see there I have the fat switch and the input boost assigned to a different type of controller, and this is a control switch. So I can set a control switch to a foot switch and kick it on and off, or I can go up here to my controller section and control switch per scene. That control switch is automatically going to turn on only in scene 2. So check this out. If I'm playing some rhythm guitar here and I use my FC6 to change scenes and go to scene 2, you're going to see those two controls kick on, and you're going to hear a lot more gain. I'm just going to play one note because I still have this pitch follower connected in there, which is also going to change the gain. Is that confusing? Probably. You can also use control switches to engage or bypass multiple blocks independent of scenes. Simply right-click the bypass control and assign the control switch of your choice. In this case, I've used control switch 3 on the parametric, and I'm going to do the same thing on the multi-band compressor. Then when I press my control switch, I can bypass or engage both blocks together. If I set them to opposite values, I could flip-flop blocks as well, which is a really cool and fun feature. We've also got a sequencer in the modifiers section, which I've done a separate video on, and you can see here I've started to draw out a custom little sequence curve that when we apply some smoothing to, will kind of give us a similar thing to, I guess, the ADSR or the LFO or that kind of random wah that we dialed in before. But in this case, what I'm going to do is try to just kind of emulate the typical sweep I would have on a wah pedal. So let's do something like this, where I'm just basically making it gradually wider. We'll set the number of stages to be 12. And I'll set it to run. I'll set the rate to about 3 Hertz in there. And instead of my pedal, which you heard me playing around with before on the wah, let's set this to the sequencer, and let's go for slightly more smoothing than we had before. Let's go for like 50%, and I'll also turn auto engage off. Alrighty, let's have a listen to this sequenced wah. Pretty cool. Again, I'm not sure that the kind of layman in the audience would know that you're not using a wah pedal. Just connecting a sine wave LFO that just goes boop, 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 up and down isn't the most convincing thing, but doing something like this with the random LFO or the sequencer is a whole lot more convincing. Speaking of LFOs, one LFO type that we didn't talk about was the square wave LFO, and you can think of this one as like an immediate on-off switch. I have this in a patch that I've called tape loops to kind of emulate, I guess, what would happen if you were pressing or twisting an old tape machine controller to change the pitch. The quad tape delay, as you can see, has a control called the motor speed. And what I've done there is I've attached an LFO to that, and I have made it a square wave LFO. I don't want the sequencer, I want the LFO right here. Square wave, the tempo is set to be 1 bar, depending on what I've basically punched the tempo in as. And there's also a whole bunch of other effects on there. But basically this is going to create an old school tape style pitch shift. I've done a dedicated video on how I built this patch, but this one is really, really fun for ambient stuff. Absolutely glorious. We'll go over 1 or 2 more things right here because I know this is turning into quite a long video. Another use for control switches would be like a brake control on the rotary block. And of course you could apply this to a trem or a univibe or something like that. But at the moment I have a control switch assigned to the rate on the rotary speaker control. The minimum I've got at about 2 Hertz and the maximum is a whole lot faster. I've set the attack and release at 150 milliseconds, so that's not going to be an immediate thing. We'll get that kind of ramp up effect going on. And have a listen to what that does when I step on my control switch. I'm jumping around all over the place now, but back to the envelope controller, you could do that and attach it to the volume control of a volume block to kind of emulate the old Boss slow gear, something like this. And what I'm doing there is I have the envelope follower attached to the volume modifier, and I've just tweaked it as follows, as you can see there. Again, there's so much kind of scope. If I really wanted a long attack and a long, or maybe like a short release on that, let's do that. That might be fun. At the same time as that, in the delay block, I have attached my expression pedal, so FC1 pedal number 1, to the input gain of this so that I can swell up my delay. I'm going to set the delay mix to 50% here, and I'm just going to control the delay input gain, which is going to control the overall delay effect in there. So I can blend that in, as well as having this envelope control attached to the slow gear. In this patch, I'm using random LFOs connected to the volume and pan controls in a volume block. So what this is making use of is the fact that you can have LFO 1A and LFO 1B, and you can set the phase of LFO 1B. So if you set that to 0, they can be in phase, so they'll both rise and fall at the same rate, but I've got them 180 degrees out of phase, so as one goes up, the other comes down. Alrighty, shout out to Simeon Harris for this whole idea as well, because I studied his presets, which you should definitely go and check out. They're amazing to kind of create a granular style delay here. So let's take a look at what's happening. We've got, what do we got here? LFO 2A on this one. So the volume is going up as LFO 2B So as this one's going down, and I think I've done a similar thing with the pan controls over here. One's going to be panning left while the other pans to the right. We've got a mega tap delay and the crystal echoes and a big reverb, and it all sounds like this. Magic. You can also control any parameter you like using external controllers and MIDI. For example, I have a PolyFX Digit, which can create its own LFOs and export them as MIDI. So I could use this as like a touchscreen LFO controller to control whatever I want in here. I was going to do a demo of this, but I think I will save that for a standalone demo with the Poly, just because the screen's a bit hard to film. But yeah, we went down the rabbit hole and we're probably right down at the bottom there. I really hope, if anything, there is some useful information in here that you can apply to your own patches on your AXFX3 or FM3. This also applies to stuff like the AX8 and the AXFX2 as well, because they have a lot of these controllers. This is the real strength of the AXFX, in my opinion. It's not just that the amps sound amazing and the effects are super pristine and high quality. It's the control you can have over all of these things. And the fact that, you know, not only can you emulate classic amps and effects, you can create new ones. You can just let your imagination run wild and create effects that not only sound really cool and fresh, they have a whole bunch of character and they can really work in whatever type of rig you're using. Go and play with some of this stuff. That's exactly what I'm going to do after I edit this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, you can check out my Patreon, or you can check out some of my music. They are both linked in the video description, along with things like my custom impulse responses, which are absolutely free. If you want to try them, stay safe, be excellent to one another. I'll see you next time.